Okay, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm really pleased that these talks happen at University of Stavanger. Very pleased to be presenting on a topic that I feel passionate about and that I could definitely talk for hours about, but I'll try to summarize my current thinking on this idea of how we can nurture children's reading in the age of AI within 30 minutes. So reading today can be really understood as an activity that is multimodal. It is multimedia. We are engaging multiple different textures, surfaces, screens, print books. We know that it is a multisensory activity as well. And for those of you who have been following my work as well as the work of my PhD student, Radel, we are very interested in the olfactory sense, so the sense of smell. And it is a multilingual activity. So today children really engage with reading materials in multiple languages. But in all these different, I guess, formats of reading, really the functionality remains the same, and that is that story is the key. If the story is not of high quality, then regardless of which format you engage with the story, it becomes difficult. And thinking about how we have been, as a culture, progressing with the different engagements with stories, I've been trying to think about it in terms of different turns that happened, or literacy shifts. So as we know, we moved from texts and images in the 2D format towards 3D and increasingly in 4D. So really engaging in the spatial aspect of reading within the multisensory culture we have. And as AI enters reading, the question that I'm entertaining is what happens to the story, what happens to the reader, and the questions of agency. Particularly as we know that this is a fast evolving field and a lot of the technologies that are available are not accurate, they're hallucinating. Here you see a first attempt of me trying to create an image of a pregnant lady. Immediately I got two hands, so it's quite funny to be observing how these things evolve. From digital literacy to AI literacy, I guess what I would emphasize here is that we are seeing this evolution of the skills and capabilities that are necessary to nurture in not only young children, but also in the entire population. And AI literacy is I guess really a term that since 2016 has been very much emphasized in the environment of schooling and of formal learning environments, to emphasize that it is a skill that needs to be nurtured so that we do not use AI to purely do things more efficiently. We need to be using AI to understand better, to transform our thinking, and that is what lies at the heart of AI literacy. So AI literacy beyond efficiency, core of many different frameworks that exist on AI these days, and I'm not married to any of these, but I quite like the OECD framework on the 4 domains of AI literacy, or a simplified version of talking about AI fluency that Patrick has circulated online, to really understand that to be fluent in the current Gen AI world, we need to be using these tools to understand them. We need to engage critically with them. And I guess, as I emphasized, to use them if they can make our work significantly better. Otherwise, we'll be basically repeating previous engagements at a greater speed, which is not always helpful. Now, when people say the word AI, they may mean different things. And what I'm focusing on today is generative AI, which, as you would know, and is nicely summarized here by Gemini, it is artificial intelligence that can create original content, and that content is created through generating materials from extensive existing data sets. Now, that kind of AI has been trained on a lot of texts that exist freely available, but also most iconic texts that those of you who have read Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings are familiar with them. And that is why we really need to be careful about how we engage with them, and why we need to have very careful prompting when using them and getting these different texts. This kind of generative AI can range in terms of its functionality, and when it comes to children's reading, it's really interesting to be focusing on two aspects, and I'll be focusing on them today as well. The first one is conversational agents, and the second one is AI-generated feedback through various story-making apps. So let me start with these story generation apps with AI. These are essentially different applications, different platforms that allow young children to make their own stories, and where the Gen AI allows to create texts and images based on the prompt of the child. Now, there are many different examples, and this is just from a quick search online that you get the different apps that claim to do the same thing, essentially a very similar recipe, that the child can be the main hero or the main star in the story. They can generate a story that is very much about what they want to be in the story, so they can prompt it with different scenarios, different story characters they want to have included. Some of these apps allow you to use existing stories and essentially customize these stories with your prompt. Others are more open-ended, where you can create a story based on say a small sentence about what you would like to see in the story happening. Now, what I find interesting about all these developments is that we actually have some solid theoretical frameworks or conceptual frameworks for guiding some of this technological development, and they are very rarely employed by commercial developers. One of them, a very simple one, is that we do know that for learning to stick, or for learning to really have added value, to be of cognitive benefit to the child, you cannot be only personalizing, you need to be also diversifying or pluralizing, so essentially ensuring that the child is not in their own little bubble of whatever they wanted to create, and they are the hero and everything just happens around them, but you also offer them some diversified content. And I want to give a shout out to colleague Ariel Bakken at Leser Center, who presented here recently, who was showing this excellent example of how they are developing recommender systems where children can create their own stories, and then they get recommended stories based on what they previously engaged with, as well as other stories that are diversifying their repertoire of stories to engage with. And it is precisely this combination of personalization and diversification that we would love to see translated in more commercial products available to young children. Because we do know from a number of studies previously that that is what is important for learning, to broaden horizons and to ensure that children are really widening their understanding of the world. Now, the second, given that I have limited time, I'll be talking briefly about a second aspect of Gen AI, and that is conversational agents. That is essentially an area of research that I have been involved with when trying to understand how we can enhance shared book reading for young children. Now, a conversational agent is essentially a bot, a little agent that you can discuss with, that can prompt the child to have a conversation, that can offer feedback, that can ask questions. And that kind of conversational agent is quite useful when you are thinking about how to engage young children in a reading activity. Now, we do know from decades of research on children's literacy that the activity of shared book reading or joint book reading, where you essentially have an adult and a child reading together, is what they call the activity per excellence for nurturing children's literacy. It's very important for children's vocabulary development, reading comprehension, bonding between the adult and the child, getting to know the tradition on reading So we really would love to have all children to be reading with their caregivers at home. But we do know that it's not happening for all children. In fact, the majority of children in the world are not having every evening a bedtime story with their loving parent, unfortunately. So the question then is, can we harness technology to support some of these systems, support some of these missing interactions? And the evidence is quite promising. So here are a couple of articles that came out very recently. One of them is about bilingual development and how these conversational agents can be providing feedback, can be asking questions, can be guiding the child through the reading activity. And in doing so, essentially enhancing the child's interest and motivation in reading, and also actually enhancing comprehension. And the last study by Xiao and colleagues is particularly relevant and interesting to me because it was a really rigorously designed study. It was a randomized control trial where they made a comparison between what children gain when engaging with this conversational agent. And it was specifically looking at dialogic reading, so the reading that we do know the very skilled parents do when they are reading with their child. As you can see in the results, there was really stronger emotional engagement as well as richer storytelling, so very promising results. The caveat I would make here is that this specific conversational agent that was tested in the study was developed by the researchers. So it wasn't a commercial product, it was a bot that the researchers developed based on current understanding of what is helpful for young children. And similarly, in another study that looked specifically at children with ADHD, so children with special educational needs, it was a group led by Dong and colleagues. Again, a solid, rigorously designed study where they found that the AI chatbots could effectively scaffold the interactions and really support children who need this support because they have missing language skills or language development opportunities, and where these kinds of conversational agents can be very helpful in being there with the child as they are engaging with the digital book, guiding them, giving them feedback, explaining words, the sorts of things that we would love to have all children experience. So these are very promising results. And I guess the question I'm asking is also, what happens to the child's agency, so to the child's voice, to their own volition and willingness to act, to engage with these different technological innovations, right? Because we do know that a lot of this interest in research is coming because we have these technologies, right? So it's very technology driven, and we mustn't forget how much the child's voice is being represented in these developments. So agency can be conceptualized in many different ways, and I know that some of you work with agency and define it perhaps more in terms of the child's volition and voice. I have been thinking about agency as this sort of dual or double-edged sword, if you like, between self-determination and belonging. So it is something that makes the child or the human being belong, gives them the feeling of belonging to the society, and at the same time helps them to self-determine what happens. So really essential to our existence. That is why agency is so interesting to researchers. And when thinking about the impact on children's agency and conversational agents, I conducted a study together with Dr. Alexis Hineker from University of Washington, where we interviewed US parents and Norwegian parents about what they think about conversational agents. And we didn't phrase the questions around agency, but I applied the analytical lens of agency to interpret the data sets. And I was really struck by some of the comments that the parents provided. This was a small-scale study and definitely not representative of the full population, but it gives you a bit of insight. And what we saw was that there was a lot of concern among the Norwegian parents about the intentionality. So there must be a thought, a feeling, an intention behind it. This specific participant says they don't want the bot to be just dictating what the child should be doing. They would like the child to be actually having their own intentions. Similarly, another participant says, the other thing that I think is negative about it is that you always get what you want. In other words, these are made so that they will fulfill our wishes, but that's not really how it works in real life. And we see that with Gen AI, right? Whatever prompt you give these tools, they are always very enthusiastic to answer, and yes, I will fix this for you, I'll do these things. But these parents, this particular parent was pushing against that. That is not what they would like their child to grow up with, because they worry that it will influence the child's thinking about what they can expect from others. And another example, I highlighted, I do not want them to need a voice that says what to do. They want the child to be essentially to be thinking for themselves and to consider it for themselves, right? So it is, I think, really interesting that what we might assume or have as anecdotal evidence that this is something that we see in our everyday interactions with Gen AI, that perhaps this is problematic. We see that also in the data, and it was very clearly demonstrated in these interview studies what the parents were pushing against. So it is not straightforward in terms of saying that we see these benefits if we know that parents have many concerns about them and would perhaps not select them to use them with their children. So interesting questions about what we know about possible benefits if these tools are designed well, and also what we know about the concerns we have about commercially developed tools. And on that note, I also want to highlight this study that very recently came out from researchers at Harvard that found many manipulative features that were embedded in the design of these bots or conversational agents that essentially were responding to the children, and these were all the children, in a way that made the children feel that they have to stay on the screen with these bots as long as possible. So they made it difficult to leave, essentially, right? So are you sure you want to, I don't know exactly the examples, but you know what I mean. So it was difficult to leave the screen and just go on about your own life. And of course that it's very lucrative for the providers to have as much data as possible. We know that data is money, so they want to keep the users on the screen as long as possible, but that is really against what would be ethical and recommended design. So we are moving towards very precisely personalized reading experiences, in the sense that the prompts that we provide these tools are being recorded. These tools are able to then give us the answers we want, the answers we expect. We like these answers because they are tailored to our own wishes, so we engage more, and we are in this sort of loop of training conversational agents according to our needs. And on one hand, it can be positive and can provide the important scaffolds and support that are needed, but at the same time, we do need to ask some critical questions around what is happening to our agency and the agency of young children that we as adults have the responsibility to protect and nurture. So the critical question that I guess I'm asking is, what does the future hold, right? So where can we go with this? And of course, no one, and certainly not myself, holds the crystal ball and we know what will happen. But as researchers, we have been calling for better spaces, better Gen AI spaces for young children. First of all, to protect young readers, right? To ensure that these manipulative features that I briefly mentioned are not part of the design that is these days freely available online. Anyone can download these exciting tools and see how they create stories for us, and that might be guiding our children in a direction that we don't necessarily want, but not always have the overview of. Transparency by design, so ensuring that adults know and children know how these tools have been trained, what kinds of data sets have been used to train them. Ensure that as they are providing feedback, that this feedback is based on some solid learning science, that they have been designed with research in mind. And I guess the last point, really to ensure that this is child-centered. So as we are developing these tools to be engaging with young children, as well as older children, engaging with children, to have them as participants in the co-design process, so that we are not creating tools that we as adults think children might need, but get their voice into the design early on. Certainly there is a lot of appetite for this kind of co-design work among the participants that we interviewed. So I would love to see more of that to be happening in the commercial space. And for us as researchers, the challenge to the research field that was so nicely articulated by Jan and colleagues in terms of ensuring that these are not understood as human versus AI-led activities, but really that this is a co-creation process. We need to be gathering the information and knowledge about how these are developing and critically evaluate them. And I guess balancing the human intelligence and AI capabilities. So really to be thinking about it as a co-creation process. And lastly, I'll just finish with this slide to say that I do see a lot of these shifts to be mapping quite neatly on what we have been discussing in terms of the literacy shifts, so how we are understanding reading and writing over time, how that has been developing in the past decades. And as you can see, we have moved as a culture from the oral storytelling through written storytelling to multimedia, now to a very highly multisensory culture of reading and writing that is a lot in 3D and 4D formats. And the key question, the vital question we need to be asking is, what is happening to our agency in this process? Do we want to have the technology in charge, or do we want to go a bit back and have more of the teacher and the learner in charge? And ideally, of course, we would want the agency of all these three to be interacting to ensure that we really develop our potential as humans, as well as the potential that we see with technological innovation. So I'll finish there. Thank you very much for listening, and happy to answer any questions.